The a7C really is an excellent camera, but I'm selling mine. Let's roll the annoying title and then I'll tell you why. This really is a great camera. I'm going to go through what I like about it, what I don't particularly care about but other people online have complained about, and then what I don't like about it and why I've decided to move on from it. So what I like about it, and first up, its size and weight, and obviously that is its selling point. It's a full frame camera in an APS-C sized body, which means it's just lightweight and easy to carry around. It's just so good. If you pair it with something like the Sony 24mm 1.4, which is also quite light, it just becomes a great travel combo. I've used it out traveling all day, didn't get tired. You're able to get amazing photos, great video. And so just for its size and weight, it really is amazing. Full frame performance, but super easy to carry around. You're not worrying about having a heavy thing to lug with you. The second thing I love about this camera is the price. It's roughly 2/3 the price of an a7 III, which it's based on, so it has the same performance as, but at a 1/3 of the price less. Now, it doesn't have all of the buttons and some of the functions that the a7 III has, but I'm not sure that's worth the extra 1/3 in price. So for that, it's just an amazing price for a great camera. The third thing I love about this camera is the quality, and not just the quality that you get out of your photos and videos, but the build quality. It feels really well built, really solid. Not heavy, but solid, as in it's not going to fall apart on you. So you know you've got something that's quality, but not heavy, so that's great. The fourth thing I love about this camera is the Flippy Screen. It's so good to be able to have that because it makes taking photos and videos way easier, especially if you're taking videos of yourself. You can point the Flippy Screen at yourself, but I just think it's easier to take photos that way, particularly when we get to the EVF, which isn't great, but the addition of the Flippy Screen is excellent. Now the things I don't care about. And the first thing is the lack of custom buttons. I know a lot of people really want those extra custom buttons to be able to map them to whatever they want, but I just haven't found that to be an important thing for me. You get the one custom button with the delete button, you can set that to whatever you want, but for me, for shooting videos, I'm normally in manual mode, so I have the shutter speed set, I normally set the aperture by the lens, and then I just use the wheel to set the ISO. If I need to set things like metering, you have to go into the menu, but I just haven't found that to be such a hassle that I thought, oh, I really wish I had a custom button to do that. So for me, the lack of custom buttons isn't an issue. That may be an issue for you if you use them all the time, and you come to this camera and you find that very frustrating, but just wasn't an issue for me. The second thing I didn't particularly care about is the fact that it uses the older menu structure. So the a7S III brought out the new Sony menu, and this one uses the older one. Honestly, I just don't really care. I get lost in the a7S III menu structure anyway. Once you know a menu structure, once you know where settings are, it's just not that hard to get to it and change the setting you need to change. It's just something you need to get used to. So I just don't find that it has the older menu structure something that impacted me at all, and I don't care about it. The third thing I don't really care about, but I could see how some people could have an issue with, is the fact that it only has the single SD card slot, not dual, so you can't do backup recording. Now, if you're shooting weddings or corporate events where you can't go back, that could be a problem. You really don't want to have to go to a bride and say, sorry, I don't have your photos, or sorry, I don't have your video. Never shoot on a single SD card where you can't go back and shoot again. Now, most of the things I do, I can just record again if I lose it. It's annoying, but it's not the end of the world. So it's not a showstopper for me that it's single SD card. Now, it doesn't mean you couldn't use this for corporate gigs or weddings. You just need an external recorder if you want to be sure, or if you want to roll that dice, which I wouldn't. Now for the negatives and why I've decided to move on from this camera. And it's not one thing, it's really the combination of all of them, but I'll go through them. The first is the ergonomics. Now that might sound weird. It's a small, lightweight camera, but full frame, which should be awesome. But this grip just doesn't do it for me. It's too shallow. And I often felt like my fingers would just, I don't know if you can see that, my fingers would just slip off. It's just not, maybe this way. It's just not deep enough, and I never felt comfortable carrying it around, even with only the 24mm. It's not a heavy setup. If your hands get a little bit sweaty, it's got quite a grippy grip, but it's just not deep. Now, if you compare that, say, to the a7 IV, that my fingers wrap all the way around, and it feels very snug in there, if you can see that. So that feels, and even though that's way heavier, that's at least twice the weight, this setup here, I don't feel like it's ever going to slip out of my hand because I've got such a big grip on the camera. So yeah, the ergonomics of that really started to get to me, particularly using it all day. I really felt I was worried. Now you could put a camera strap on, obviously, and then have it around your neck as backup. So if it dropped out of your hands, it would just swing down. But I hate camera straps. I find them so frustrating, so annoying. They always get in the way. When you try to go portrait, it's wrapping around your arm, or if you're trying to do video panning or whatever, it's sort of holding you back. I don't like them. And so I never put camera straps on. And that just meant that I just felt a little uneasy just with the ergonomics of it, particularly when I put a bigger, heavier lens on. So I had the f1.2 50mm, which is quite a beefy lens, and that really just kind of unbalances it. And I was worried that if I wasn't careful, just one moment of like concentration and out it would fall on my head. Never happened, of course, but that always did worry me. Also with the ergonomics, because this is shallow, where the shutter button is, it just means that it's kind of under your second part of your finger, not under the tip of your finger. So in between your first and second knuckle. It's just in the wrong spot. I want the shutter to be there, but it's back here, which means you're just bending your finger back for the shutter button. Now, the record button is in the same place as it is on the a7 IV and a7S III, which I think Sony has done it wrong. They should have switched the custom to and the record button, so you could easily, when the camera's up to your face, just move from the shutter to the record button. It's unnatural to go across to where the record button is, so I really can't complain about where it is on the a7C compared to the a7S III and S4, but it's wrong in on all of those cameras. It really needs to be right there, just behind your shutter button, so that you can easily move your finger back and just hit the record button. Particularly for someone like me who likes to do video up to my face and I can't look down, I always hit the custom button on the other cameras, so that's in the wrong spot. But I can't fault the a7C for that against another camera because they're all the same. But yeah, the ergonomics just don't work for me with this camera, unfortunately. Now, I did mention the EVF before, and this EVF to me is almost unusable. In bright light conditions, you will want to bring it up to your face because it'd be hard to see the screen, but it's a very small viewfinder. It's got this hard rubber around it, and pressed up against your eyebrow for long periods of time, it actually gets quite sore. And it's in a weird spot. It's not in the center, it's off to the side. It's clearly designed not to be used much, and that makes it almost like they shouldn't have put it on at all, but they did, and it's kind of useless. So now if you come from the a7S III viewfinder, which has an amazing resolution, and the a7 IV II, not as good, but still good, a very usable viewfinder, this isn't. The third thing that I really dislike about this camera, which again isn't really the camera's fault, it's the technology that it's based on, is the color science. Having the a7S III as my main video camera, I often use this as the second or the alternate angle. And even if all the settings are the same, the color is noticeably different. Now that's not too bad if you're shooting in log and then you're grading in post, which is a pain in the neck, but you can do it. But I'm often using these cameras in a live situation, and when you switch between the two cameras, you just see a shift in color, and it's really annoying. Even if the white balance is set the same, the picture profiles are set the same, they are different, they look different. So you're kind of going to use white balance to match the color, but it's by eye and it's not great. It really would be, well, I don't really want the a7C S3 to have the color science of the a7 III that it was based on. I want the improved in color science, but it's just a shame that it doesn't match the a7S in that respect, and I guess it can't. It also doesn't support Cinetone, so if you're using S-Cinetone on the a7S III, then you need something like the a7 IV as your backup camera, so you can use S-Cinetone on that as well and have the colors match much closer. They're not exactly the same, but they are closer. The fourth thing I don't like about this camera is the lack of video formats. And again, coming from the a7S III, you've got a lot of choices. You've got all intra, you've got H.265, you've got 422, 10-bit. This, you've basically just got 8-bit, 420 in either 60 megabit or 100 megabit, and that's it. So you've got very limited format. That's H.264. Again, even if you're shooting in log, it just means your color grading is not going to be the same because you just don't have as much information as from the other camera. So that does mark it down when I'm trying to pair it with the a7S III. The fifth thing I don't like about this camera is the fact that it uses a micro HDMI and not full size. There is actually room here for them to use a full size port, but they've decided to go with micro. Now I guess it's a compact camera, so they've decided to keep things compact, and a compact HDMI port makes sense. But for me, if the a7S III had a micro HDMI, then I would always have micro adapters to full size and that would be fine. But it's actually caught me out where I've taken this camera and I didn't have an adapter because I've gotten used to not needing one, having full size HDMI. And it meant that luckily I was early enough to be able to go all the way home and get my adapter and come back again. But I just don't like the fact that one camera has full and one camera doesn't. So that started to be a problem and actually caught me out. Thankfully, wasn't a disaster, but could have been. The final thing I don't like about this camera is that its minimum shutter speed is 1/4000th of a second, whereas the a7 IV has 1/8000th of a second. And that might seem like a minor thing, but when you're using a very fast lens like the f1.2 50mm, and even with an ND filter, if you're outside and you're trying to get that shallow depth of field, even with ISO at its minimum, you still end up having to stop down, and so you just can't push the camera to the absolute limit with 1/8000th of a second and then get your aperture as wide as you can because you're just limited by that 1/4000th. Now I got caught out doing that. I was trying to set up a photo and I thought I had everything right, but for whatever reason I didn't notice what the camera was telling me the exposure was, well past +2, and I overexposed the photo because I was going for depth of field. You end up having to stop down, but then there's no point having a very expensive fast lens if you're ending up stopping down to f4 or something like that. Now, 1/4000th to 1/8000 is not going to make the difference between 1.2 and f4, obviously, but it can make the difference between 1.2 and 1.8, something like that, and a 1.2 lens is a lot more expensive than 1.8. The point is that when you have an expensive fast lens, you want to be able to use it as much as possible, and 1/4000th was just a limiting factor that could have gone a little bit extra with 1/8000th of a second. Now, obviously, you'll notice that my dislikes of this camera really are mostly in relation to how it performs next to the a7S III. And that really is why I'm moving on from this camera. When the a7 IV came out, it in a lot of ways was the all-rounder that could kind of match the a7S III, particularly as a second camera with the same or roughly the same color profiles. It has the S-Cinetone, it has the S-Log3, same as the a7S III. So you're going to get much closer using it as a second camera, but of course it has the advantage of being able to take decent photos, which the a7S III can't, only being 12 megapixel. So although I wanted this to be my secondary camera, it really didn't work out to be that way. Now, having said that, if this is the only camera you have, if this is the only camera I had, I wouldn't be upgrading to the a7 IV. I don't think there's enough of a benefit to upgrade to the a7 IV for basically twice the price. So if you own this camera, I wouldn't be recommending you selling it to get the a7 IV. However, if you're doing what I'm doing and trying to pair it with the a7S III for video, then you may want to consider, if you've got the money, to upgrade to the a7 IV. Now, when the a7C II comes out, which will be probably based on the a7 IV internals, now that could be the camera to get. Game over, boys.